on matters food related and very patiently waiting in the wings is Hannah from Oddbox, who I'm delighted now to introduce it with for our final segment. You've heard from us, you've heard from agencies, you've heard from insight professionals, you've heard from creatives. Now, finally, you get to hear from a client. So, Hannah, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how a pure play digital advertiser, i.e. Oddbox, embraced print media and turned it to its advantage. I thought I'd actually start a little bit by saying a little bit about myself. So if we go on to the next slide. So here are some cringy pictures of me in my previous roles. The reason why it's relevant is because my previous roles were in paid digital. So my first big job out of university was about 6 years ago in a startup called Brain Labs, who some of you may have heard of. They're not quite startups anymore. At the time, Brain Labs specialized in PPC, but I joined quite a small paid social team. And from there, I helped them to build up their team and actually eventually became the head of paid social before I left. From there, I decided it was time for something a little bit different. And I decided to leave Brain Labs and join Oddbox, which is where I am now. At the time, my paid social skills were super relevant for Oddbox because Oddbox relied heavily on digital marketing for growth. However, here I am talking to you today about print media. So as you'll find out, I quickly developed and delved into the world of offline media, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more. So if we go on to the next slide, the agenda for this session is who Oddbox are, in case you haven't heard of us, and what our mission is, how we grew, our reliance on paid digital, our first flyering campaign, our flyering expansion from there, the challenges and the key learnings. So if we go on to who we are, our mission. So rather than tell you a little bit about what we do, I thought it would be interesting first to take everyone to what our mission is to help explain what we do from there. So what is our mission and our vision? Well, quite simply, our mission is to fight food waste to save the planet, and our vision is a world where all food grown is eaten, which sounds very lofty, but there is a good reason for this that perhaps not everyone knows about. So for example, I don't know if everyone knows, but around 40% of all food grown goes uneaten at the moment, which wastes with it a huge amount of energy and water. And what's worse is that all that food waste is currently responsible for 10% of global emissions, making food waste one of the most addressable issues in the fight against climate change at the moment. So it's a huge issue and something that we want to tackle. So if we go on to the next slide, the question is, what are we doing about it? So that's where the Oddbox product comes in. We're trying to do our bit to fight food waste by rescuing the too wonky or the too odd or the too small or the too many, more often than not just surplus, fruit and veg that would have otherwise been at risk of going to waste. We then package all of this up and send it to our customers in a weekly or bi-weekly subscription and help enable them to do their bit at home. And if we go on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about how we've done this in our story from the beginning. So we started in 2016 when our founders, husband and wife couple, Emily and Deepak, tasted a delicious but ever so slightly ugly tomato in a market in Portugal. And this is where the idea for Oddbox formed. It struck them that we only ever see aesthetically pleasing fruit and veg in our supermarkets. And when they did some digging, they learned that roughly 40% of all food grown goes uneaten. And that a lot of this waste happens because there's often just too much of it, or because it doesn't meet the strict cosmetic standards of our supermarkets today. So this is where Oddbox was born. We started in Brockley in London, and over the next 3 years, we expanded to cover the whole of London. And instead of telling farmers what to grow, we asked farmers what was already growing and going spare. And so we started the supply-led model that we have today. In 2020, we saw huge growth, as did many other food companies, and we expanded out of London and into the south. We also became a B Corp, which was huge for us, and we committed to being net zero by 2030. In 2021, we followed on from that great success of expansion and expanded into a whopping 75% of the UK, which is very big for us as well. And in 2022, we've continued to grow. We saw our biggest month yet at the beginning of 2022, and we have lots of other things on the horizon. So if we go on to the next slide, how did we grow so quickly? Well, the answer is actually just through a lot of hard work and testing of different channels. A lot of hard work came from our founders and our early employees and the early marketing team, which I definitely can't take credit for. They ran lots of different channels. They did some small scale flyering that you can see there when we were called Tasty Misfits. That they delivered by themselves, of course. They did PR stunts, as you can see on the left. They went to Wimbledon dressed up as strawberries and petitioned for the strawberries that would get thrown away that year at Wimbledon. And we did do some influencer gifting, which was successful for us. But what we did come back to again and again, I'm afraid to say in this seminar, but we did come back to digital marketing, which by 2020 was actually one of our main channels. Now, if we go on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about how we became reliant on paid digital and what the implications were. So if we look back at 2020, our largest investment by far was on paid social, and within that mostly on Instagram. This in turn fueled our PPC growth, especially PPC brand, which meant that by the end of 2020, about 80% of our budget went on these two channels, so Google and Meta. And they were our largest two performance channels. Our second largest channel was influencers, but again, this was mainly on Instagram. And so the main implications of this, and what we've seen from quite a few people talking today, is that we were targeting similar people again and again, city-based young women between the ages of 25 and 35 who had the money to pay for different ways of buying groceries. Both the marketing team at Oddbox and also Facebook's algorithm, or I should say Meta's algorithm, soon believed that this was the only audience for us. We kind of got stuck in that cycle. And then this reliance was fueled by the tailwinds of the pandemic. We basically exploded in March 2020 as everyone wanted food delivery. So much so that we actually had to turn our website off for a while as we simply couldn't take on any more customers. We continue to see that huge interest at each stage of the pandemic, which whilst was great for growth, meant that we essentially rested on our laurels a little bit. Before the pandemic, we had tested different channels, but why test more channels when you're constantly exceeding your targets with your current channel mix? So by the summer of 2021, however, we started to see a few headwinds. The first, and again, something we've already talked about today, was Apple's release of iOS 14.5, which asked all iPhone customers if they wanted to opt out of tracking. This was a great move for consumers, so for you and I, however, not so great for businesses. The data that had once allowed us to optimize so well on Facebook or Meta was gradually limited as iPhone customers started to update their phones one by one and reduced our conversion rates and made Facebook far less efficient for us. At the same time, we also had another headwind and we were seeing the world start to open up again. Again, this was great for you and I and for consumers, but not so great for us as a business. Our target audience were no longer had the time on their hands to cook, and instead were eating out, going on holiday, and just getting back to their old lives. So between these two events, by the end of 2021, we were starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in our customer acquisition and our customer revenue. So what did we do about it? Well, luckily, on the next slide, thank you, we have an amazing agency called Journey Further who came on board in August 2020 and had slightly foreseen these problems with our over-reliance on paid digital, and had already tested a flyering campaign at the tail end of 2020 in conjunction with a third-party agency who specialised in print. Now, this agency offered us the expertise we needed to test flyering at a granular level, and in particular, they offered us the creative capacity, the analytical capacity, and the testing capacity for this particular test. There were a few worries in-house, which maybe a few of you can relate to. So worries about the environmental impact, that flyering might be too invasive, or the worries that the creative wasn't quite on brand for us as a company. We managed to limit the environmental impact by making sure all the paper we used was either recycled or FSC and was all carbon offset. We addressed the invasive worries by making sure that if we did use any address mailers, they were all partially addressed. And finally, we ensured that the brand team had the final creative sign off on everything. So hopefully everything was on brand enough for them. And with this first wave of flyering, we ran tests within our creatives, our format, our offers, and also our geo-targeting. And that enabled us to measure the incremental uplift. So all in all, at the end of the test, the results were really positive. We saw that we actually had the same CPAs as in-platform Facebook. And this is really significant because at the time, it was before the iOS changes. So Facebook was actually over attributing in-platform. And this CPA was 20% below target. And we also exceeded our subscriber targets by 27%. So at the end of the test, we effectively found a channel that we could use as a flex channel to scale as and when we needed extra subs. So if we go to the next slide, when we go back to the summer of 2021, and we were looking for a new channel to turn to, flyering was a bit of a no-brainer. However, the only problem was that we lacked the control whilst using an agency. We found that the creators weren't quite as on brand as we'd like. And for the effort that we put into making them on brand, we'd be better off doing it ourselves. We also lacked the flexibility to run small tests in new areas. So what we did was we turned to Whistl, and we started working with Whistl, who offered us the ability to work in-house while still getting good rates and still getting support that we needed, especially for me being from a pretty much only digital background. We launched our first big campaign with Whistl in September of 2021 to great results. We continue to see the same great CPAs that we'd got in that smaller test that we'd previously done, but at scale, which was the crucial point. And from here, we quickly incorporated flyering into one of our BAU channels. And between September 21 and March 22, flyering has basically become one of our biggest channels, driving the most or the highest volume of subscriptions. We've managed to run 12 tests on both our targeting and creative, letting us build up a stronger picture of what works and making it quite optimizable, similar to what we would have been doing on paid social and digital. And then off the back of purchasing our own Experian data, we've also built up our own custom targeting model in-house, which has helped us increase our conversion rates, but also increase our lifetime value. And finally, we've seen that flyering is not only a great channel for conversions at scale, but also for that strong lifetime value to CAC ratio that we're looking for. And you can see here an example of one of the flyers, one of our key kind of 2-pager Doordrops that we come back to time and time again, that we tested from the very beginning. Now, if we go on to the next slide, there have been challenges along the way, so it hasn't quite been perfect. The biggest challenge we've had is how to stay aligned to our values with a form of marketing that, well, we thought had a bigger carbon footprint than digital, but we've just found out that it doesn't necessarily have that. So as I said earlier, we tried to overcome this challenge by only using recycled or FFC paper. It always has to be recyclable, and it has to be carbon offset. We've also worked with some great B Corp printers, one of which, C Corp, uses no water during the printing process, which makes it even more sustainable and environmentally friendly. And we also changed our flyering design to have a key call out on there to people, to encourage people to either pass the flyer on if they're not interested, or if they're already with a competitor, or if not, to recycle it. So hopefully we've kind of overcome that challenge somewhat. The next challenge was engagement versus efficiency. So we've tested lots of different formats. We typically always run Doordrops, but we have tested partially addressed mailers. We've also tested 4 pages and 6 pages. We love the fact that the larger formats allow us to have more information on there, and we always see a higher engagement with those larger formats, so the 4 pages and the 6 pages. However, we've also found that we drive the better efficiency with the 2 pages. So that's why you'll see that more often than not, we do use those 2-page Doordrops for our flyering activity. And then in terms of fatigue, it's also been quite a big problem for us and one that we're facing at the moment. We've now sent out millions of flyers, and some households have seen our flyers multiple times. We now have to think outside the box a little bit on how we keep these potential customers engaged and to keep the channel effective. And then finally, attribution. Again, it's something that we've talked a lot in this session, but we've had to look at attribution in slightly different ways. So for most of our measurement, we use coupon codes and coupon code redemption. But we've actually found that the true incremental uplift of our flyering activity is higher than what we're seeing just through coupon redemptions, which I'm sure is probably very similar for everyone. To analyze this and to get kind of exact data on it, we have run geo tests, which luckily is very easy with flyering and Doordrops in particular. And we have clear holdout regions that allow us to measure what the incrementality of that activity was, and then apply this to our attribution model. So at different times, for example, we can have an incremental uplift of 2 or 3 times what we're seeing with our coupon attribution, which is really useful to know and helps us evaluate how much we want to reinvest in the channel going forward. And then finally, on my last slide is our key learnings. So hopefully the first one should be quite obvious by now. Avoid one channel reliance. Not only does this put you in a bit of a sticky position if something changes within that channel, like we've all seen with Meta, it also restricts your customer demographic and doesn't allow you to scale. So once we started our flyering, we actually saw that we weren't just stuck in kind of that niche demographic of younger women who are in cities. We managed to kind of expand to older demographics, families as well, which has really helped our lifetime value too, our CAC to lifetime value ratio. Think about in-housing versus agency. We saw some great results with the agency that we used, but we also managed to get that flexibility that we wanted by in-housing. The third one is always test your creatives and your audience. We always employ a test and learn approach, and we've gathered lots of great insights from the tests that we've done. We know, for example, that when we launch in new areas, a very slimmed back 2-pager works better than when we're hitting an area again, at which time a 2-pager with more information about us actually works better, which is counterproductive or different to what I would have thought it would be. But because we have those results, we can be confident in those learnings. And finally, make sure you do run those regional tests with holdout groups, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time proving to stakeholders what the actual effect of your flyering is. Now that's everything from me.